Nina Wopida Tanka Toshka Yupiokid. Wochekiakaga. Thank you so much, Galen, for doing those prayers and bringing us this Hochoka and this center in the presence of the river. Do you feel the Mni Sosa, the Mni Wakpa? She's listening. So we invite you. We see some of the upriver people. There's some downriver people. The Isanti are going to be coming later, so there'll be people coming and going. So we want you to think about why you're here. You brought prayers. We're so honored to have the Lummi have brought your prayers all across Turtle Island. And so we're going to talk about something really important. And I'm going to ask Mari and Guy. I hate to put you in the sun here, but it's not 93 degrees yet. It's coming later. But if you want to sit up here or wherever you feel comfortable, but we're going to go into defining why we're here. So we have our own wowaka, our own wotuns, the commitment to natural law. So, but we've arrived at a point in time where we have to write these down. And so that's what we're doing is we're kicking off this meeting. We're beginning to we're speaking to the spirit today, the spirit of the river, your spirit, and the spirits that are listening here. You're sitting here on land that is taken areas. It's occupied territory. Over to the east is the prison camp of Sitting Bull, Tatanka Iotaka. So we're working with the Park Service. We live in an exciting time where we have some of our people at the top of this Washichu hierarchy. Dorothy Firecloud, we're talking with her about restoring and creating a memorial camp for Sitting Bull. He was freed after 4 years through the efforts of one of our grandfathers struck by the Ree, and they suffered over there for 4 years. And the thing that he said before he left is he said he was most worried about the women and children. That's what he worried about because he knew that the oppressors target women and children, and that's the wiping out the strains of our generation. And so think about that camp over there. There are women and children that lived through the winters for 4 years. This was taken from us in 2000, another oppressor act, the Water Resources Development Act. We filed a lawsuit. We wanted this back because it is taken area. There's a law called the Surplus Property Act, which would have made this returned to us. But two of the military representatives, Daschle and Janklow, made a deal and they transferred this to the state. The court was dismissed without, what did they call it? Prejudice. So it can be brought back. So lay prayers that we will be able to get this back because the village was here. The White Swan Village was here all the way up to the river bend. And so we became homeless, and that was my home. So I was a year and a half, and I remember them taking the belongings out of the houses because the river was coming. So those ancestors are listening, and we need to reclaim that. So that's what we're doing here today. And I have some esteemed relatives that have come to talk about, and maybe we could have a couple of people come up and pass these out while they begin. Could we have about security? A couple of you guys, can you come up and pass these out? There's 4 handouts, but make sure because then you could follow along. But I'm going to have these relatives introduce themselves, and they have done some of the pre-work in proclaiming the rights of nature and the rights of Mother Earth. So we're learning together. The Iowa tribe, they were going to send somebody. I don't know if they're here. Maybe they'll be here later, but they're the only one on the Missouri River that has made a proclamation. And so it's time for us to kick that off. Save me a copy too. So I'm going to hand it over, and you can introduce yourselves and welcome to this beautiful morning. Well, Peter.
Oso, Onakwet Netakam, Wapasha Nitotam, Kashitna Nitsky Wakian, Omat no Mane Netawim, Mashikta Heom OGP. My English name is Guy Ryder. My real name is Onakwet. There's many translations for that name, but the one that I was told, the most sacred translation is he who is handsome and good looking and brilliant and amazing. You could look it up. It's true. But I wanted to just thank Faith and the Lummi for having this day, having this gathering. And I'm honored to be here. I come from the Menominee Indian reservation, the nation, up in Wisconsin. We're the original inhabitants of Wisconsin, right by the Great Lakes, about 40 miles north of Green Bay. We're definitely Packer fans and Brewer fans, and go Bucks, right? Won the championship there the other day, so I always put a little tobacco out for each one of them. You know, I'm just kidding. But I'm good to be here. Thank you.
Good morning. Thank you, everybody. My name is Mari Margil. I'm with an organization based in Spokane, Washington, called the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights. And we work on environmental rights for the human right to a healthy environment, as well as the rights of nature. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I very much want to thank Faith and Judith in particular, who managed to get us here on this beautiful day. I'm so very happy to be able to share this with you and looking forward to the discussion.
I didn't hear you. Sorry. You want me to? Okay, you have your agenda that you put together. Okay. So what time is it now? Okay, so follow your time period on there. Okay. Also, just a PSA here. My son, Kip Spotted Eagle, has a coffee shop over in Wagner. And voila, he brought us some coffee from Grindhouse 46. So now you can really wake up. So there's coffee over there. He went to get some knives. He brought bagels. And so he went to get a knife for the bagels. So, and we'll have water. So help yourself to coffee. We're going to go ahead and we have to get an overview of what we're talking about. So this is the education process, and the ancestors already know this. So keep them in mind as we go through these English words that we have to, the foreigner's language, but these two have gone through this process. So I'm going to turn it over to them and just go for, what time did you say it was? Okay, so let's go to about 10:30, and then we'll regroup and get questions, comments, and then we'll go back into it. Okay?
So I think this is probably easier, but I really wish everybody had had coffee already, actually. So again, my name is Mari with the Center for Democratic and Environmental Rights, and Faith has invited us here to talk about this concept of rights of nature, and particularly rights of rivers and rights of the Missouri. So just to say, we wanted to provide an overview this morning of what is the rights of nature, where it is happening, why it is happening. And Guy is going to be speaking to us particularly about the work he's been doing around the Menominee River. So in very, very basic terms, this concept of rights of nature or recognizing legal rights of nature means just what it means. Recognizing that ecosystems, species, and nature on the whole possesses certain legal rights, such as the most basic right of nature to exist, to thrive, to regenerate, to evolve, to be restored. Today, under most structures of law, nature doesn't even possess the right to exist. And so there's a long road to go. And so we wanted to talk about, what does this mean? How is it happening? Where is it happening? So the concept of legal rights in written law is the highest form of protection that there are. The United States Constitution, for instance, includes the First Amendment, the right to free speech. That's codified in the highest form of law as a legal right within the United States. So this concept of rights of nature is similar. It's putting into law this highest form of legal protection for nature, which nature does not possess now. Nature, under most structures of law around the world today, is considered to just be an inanimate thing. It's considered to be property, or many people just refer to it as a commodity or an item of commerce, something to be traded, bought, and sold. It doesn't possess any inherent recognized legal rights. And so this concept of moving from treating nature as this inanimate, not living thing to being recognized as a living entity with legal rights represents a really fundamental shift in how Western structures of law treat nature today. And it represents what we believe is a really necessary shift in the human relationship with the natural world, with Western structures of law and Western culture has a very hard time understanding today. So this is a really fundamental change in how we govern ourselves toward nature, but changing indeed how nature itself is treated under the law. And so right now we have laws in place in different places, which recognize rights of rivers, rights of species, rights of nature on the whole. And this stands in stark contrast to how traditional, conventional environmental laws work today. As many of you have probably struggled within working to protect different places under environmental laws. As you may know, environmental laws treat nature as a thing. And under those laws, what those laws do is regulate how human beings, how corporations, how governments can use nature, literally, how we can use nature. So those laws legalize things like, rather than protecting us from fracking, environmental laws legalize fracking. Rather than protecting us from mining, they legalize mining. Rather than protecting us from pipelines, environmental laws legalize and authorize pipelines. Which is really quite surprising for most people who think that you look to environmental laws to protect the natural world. It actually is regulating how we use and exploit nature and putting certain rules around how we do it, but legalizing and authorizing the use and exploitation of nature for these industrial purposes. And the consequences of that aren't terribly surprising, but we always act surprised when we see news headlines about, oh, and I heard this as I was driving over from Sioux Falls yesterday, that surprise, Enbridge has announced that there was spills from the construction of the pipeline. Well, of course there were spills from the construction of the pipeline. We're authorizing that thing to happen. Surprise, there's, when we blow the tops off of mountains in West Virginia, there's going to be destruction of streams and native species. Well, we're legally authorizing people to dynamite off the top of mountains, and of course there's going to be destruction of nature. We act surprised when these things happen, but of course they're the logical outcome of when we legally authorize the exploitation of nature. And the consequences of these kinds of laws all over the world, of course, we're seeing right now, many are saying we're in the sixth great extinction, with extinction rates for species around the world at 1,000 plus times natural background rates. We see, of course, the destruction of ecosystems like coral reefs, which are dying and bleaching all over the world. We're seeing global warming. I live in Eastern Washington State, and when I first moved there, we didn't have fire season, but we do have fire season now. And that's a direct result of climate change, which of course is going to happen when we're digging out fossil fuels and burning them all over the world. All of these things, we think about, oh, these things should be illegal, but they're not illegal. They're legalized. That's what environmental laws do. And in different parts of the world now, you have people, you have grassroots groups, you have communities, you have tribal nations, you have governments of all kinds, and you even have courts which are saying enough is enough. We need to move to make a fundamental shift in how we relate to nature and how we live on the earth. And it's not enough for us to do this, voluntarily. We actually have to drive it into our basic structures of law, which means changing how we govern ourselves toward nature, but also mean changing how nature itself is treated by the law itself. And that has started to happen. The co-founder of my organization worked on the very first law to recognize that nature possesses legal rights. That was in a community in Pennsylvania in 2006, so 15 years ago now. We had the very first rights of nature law anywhere in the world. 2 years later, in 2008, we were invited into Ecuador as they were writing a new constitution, and we spoke to them about what it would mean to recognize rights of nature, or Pachamama. And that year, Ecuador became the very first country in the world to put into its national constitution that nature possesses fundamental legal rights. And since then, we've had really a growing number of places that have recognized legal rights of the natural world or ecosystems or species. With respect to rivers in particular, in New Zealand, they've recognized that the Whanganui River possesses certain legal rights. In Florida, just on November, 90% of the people in Orange County, Florida, where Disney World is, Orlando is, 90% of the people there voted to recognize that the Wakaiva River and the Ikonlakachi River possess legal rights. You have in Colombia, the Constitutional Court there in 2016 recognized that the Atrato River possesses legal rights. The Ganges was recognized as possessing legal rights by a state court in India. You have the Magpie River being recognized as possessing legal rights. That's in Quebec earlier this year by a First Nation and by a non-Indigenous community as well. The Klamath River was recognized as possessing legal rights by the Yurok in Northern California. And Guy is going to speak to us about his work within the Menominee Nation to recognize that the Menominee River possesses legal rights. And this is a growing phenomenon. Today, across the United States, you have 36 communities that have recognized legal rights of nature or of particular ecosystems. You have laws, national constitution in Ecuador. Bolivia has a national rights of Mother Earth law. Uganda has amended its national environmental law to include the rights of nature. You have specific laws in New Zealand around particular ecosystems. We're working in a number of different countries where, like in Sweden, they've introduced a national constitutional amendment to recognize rights of nature. In Australia, they have done this. In Tanzania, they're moving this forward. In Nepal, to recognize rights of the Himalaya. This really represents a really fundamental shift in from how we treat nature today under the law to how we believe we should be treating nature under the law, meaning that, as Colombia's constitutional court said, and I think they quite eloquent in this, that human beings need to recognize that we are not a quote unquote ruler of nature, but that we are part of nature and dependent on nature. This shouldn't be so shocking to us, but to see the highest court in Colombia saying this and writing it down really represented this, sort of ripple through the environmental advocacy world that this is possible. We have courts that are even doing this, which tend to be the most conservative government instruments that exist. So it's really representing this fundamental shift. And as we work with different places, we have increasingly found there's, I guess I would say, a greater openness to this kind of change, because understand that when we say we need to change how we govern ourselves toward nature, it means we need to put limits on what human beings can do. The idea being that we can no longer think that we can interfere with the basic natural functions of ecosystems or species and think that they're going to be healthy and thriving. Rather, we need to recognize that we can no longer interfere with how they live because we're interfering with their ability to even be alive, to exist. And so it's a really, really big change that is occurring. So I also wanted to say that we've seen this begin to move within tribal nations as well. So the first tribal nation that I worked with was the Ho-Chunk, and they were the first tribe to move forward and vote on a rights of nature resolution at their General Assembly several years ago. You have the Yurok, as I mentioned, recognized rights of the Klamath through a resolution several years ago. The Ponca tribe of Oklahoma has a rights of nature measure in place. They call it a customary law there. The White Earth Nation was the first to recognize rights of a species, monomen or wild rice, which occurred several years ago. And now they're beginning to implement and enforce that law. As I mentioned, Guy is going to be speaking about their resolution on Menominee to recognize rights of the Menominee River. And many have, I won't speak for Indigenous peoples, I'm not an Indigenous person, but many have said that this is moving towards an Indigenous relationship with nature that already exists, but certainly doesn't exist within Western structures of law. And we see it as a much needed shift to a different kind of way of living. In Ecuador, they have this concept of buen vivir, which means good living, and it means recognizing that we're all part of a community and that nature is part of that community. And they've now put that into their highest form of law, their national constitution, as part of and within the rights of nature concept, which I think says it very, is a very profound statement in that country. Rights of nature laws, we work with, for the most local communities to national governments, and they share a lot of parallels. I just want to give you a basic concept because we're here today to talk about this idea of what would it mean to recognize rights of the Missouri. And so the basic rights that we see within rights of nature laws, of course, at the very heart of those laws are recognizing certain rights. So you see basic rights like the right to exist, as I mentioned, the right to thrive, the right to regenerate, the right of nature to naturally evolve, the right of nature to perform its natural functions. And what does that mean? So in the local law in Florida regarding the Wekiva River, it means the right of the river to flow. I mean, a very basic idea. The right of a river to not be obstructed, so not to have dams. The right of rivers to abundant, clean water, water that it needs to be a healthy, robust ecosystem that provides life. In places like Lafayette, Colorado, they recognize a right to a healthy climate for both the climate itself, so that it would be free from human-caused fossil fuel emissions, but also the right of the people there to a healthy climate. That combination of the human right to a healthy environment and the right of the environment itself goes together very clearly, we think. And so rights of nature laws tend to, they can be very simple, they can be more complex, but essentially at their heart, these rights, these legal rights that nature needs. And beyond that, a way to exercise that right. That is, be able to use that right so you can enforce it and you can defend it. That is, you can protect it. Because we don't want it to be just a piece of paper sitting on a shelf collecting dust. It actually has meaning. It has real significance in how we relate and govern ourselves towards nature, which means changing the kinds of decisions that human beings and governments make and corporations are able to make about how we interact with nature, so that our moving to from an anthropocentric view, a human-centered view of nature, to an ecocentric or biocentric view, that our decisions foremost are about how do we make sure that the ecosystem or the species remains healthy, rather than how much can we take from that ecosystem or species until it is no longer there. So today, as I said, we are here to talk about what it might mean to look at recognizing, securing legal rights of the Missouri. And we do this kind of work in a number of places. And for us, it means understanding what's important about the river, what it is you want and need to protect, and figuring out, navigating what that law can look like. How do you move that law forward? How do you build the kind of support you would need to do that? And so I'm very, very happy to be here to be able to have that conversation, answer questions. One of the handouts that we had is a timeline, and it traces, I think the past 15 years, about the different sort of key milestones and recognizing legal rights of nature all over the world. And you'll see that it's really a growing list. And for us, that's very heartening, because it means that more and more people and even governments are understanding this kind of change is needed. So I'll stop there and turn it over to Guy. Thank you very much for your time.
Poso, good morning. So forgive me a little bit. I'm a little nervous. I never usually speak to crowds this small. But I don't know if everybody, I thought I was listening and hearing thunder, but I think it's everybody's bellies hungry this morning. Should we take maybe a minute or two if you guys want to grab something to eat, or should we Should we get right into it? Huh? Couple minutes? Aho, aho. Okay. So we're I wanted to start a little bit. I know everybody I kind of broke the sacred rule of letting Indians go eat because sometimes you gotta get them back here. But I wanted to just thank my auntie here for inviting us here to talk and talk a bit about some of the work that we've been doing, some of the work that I've been doing, um, with the rights of nature. The Menominee Nation has been fighting a sulfide mine called the Back 40 mine. They're trying to locate it on the Menominee River, and the Menominee River is named that way is because of us as a people. It's in our oral history. It states that we come from that river. We the very first Menominee came out of the mouth of that river, so it's very important to us. And just like a lot of our tribes, a lot of our relatives around, we've lost a lot as a tribe and as a nation from all the things that they've done to us. But this particular mine is located right on like the last remnants of our great culture that was on that river. In our language, they call it Minikani Sepe, which kind of means like the good river or where the good village lived. We had a big village there. So when we started to try to raise up against this and rise up against this threat, we really didn't know what to do. We fought a mine back in the late 80s, early 90s called the Crandon mine. And it was just at the headwaters of the Wolf River, which rolls right through our reservation, but it rolls through many communities in other nations. So they came together and this they had just a whole tremendous amount of opposition to it, and it was a real spiritual led opposition. They were eventually able to stop that mine. The Potawatomi, my tribe, the Menominee, and the Molek Ojibwe band that's close there, actually purchased the land that the mine was going to be on, so they weren't able to mine there. Um, but when this back 40 came around, it was like 20, 30 years later, and a lot of those elders that were there at that time were no longer around, and we had to like kind of scramble a little bit to figure out like what are we going to do. How can we fight this multi-million-dollar company? And I actually met Mari at a conference, I don't know, geez, like 8-9 years ago now, just unrelated, and I heard her talk, and she was talking about rights of nature back then, and I didn't know much about it, but it made a lot of sense to me, and I always kind of kept it in my head. So we wanted to protect that river, and one of the things that we did right away was we did a sacred water walk, and we did that with our grandmother Josephine Mendamen Kahnapu, who is no longer here. She's passed away a couple of years ago, but she's responsible for those sacred water walks. She walked around all 5 Great Lakes, to raise awareness about what the water condition and the way we're treating water and looking at water. She said she walked through 2 hips, I think 3 knees, she said, and about 10,000 pairs of Nikes. I remember her saying that one time. So we did this water walk, and the reason why I'm bringing up this water walk is because it led to us to think about this rights of nature work, spending that time with the water, spending that time along the rivers, because we followed the rivers all the way up. Was a real beautiful moment. It's probably one of the best things I've done in my life. It was 126 miles that walk. We were able to accomplish it in 3 days. They told me right away that it was going to be all downhill, but it definitely wasn't all downhill. It was up hills and downhills, and after about 5 minutes, I was like, "This is just too much. I gotta lay down or take a break or something." But I remember her seeing my tiredness and seeing that fatigue. It was more than 5 minutes. It was probably like, I don't know, hour maybe or so. But anyway, she had seen the fatigue in me, and she said, "Nephew, I want you to get into the car." And so I got in, and I thought, what did I do? Maybe I did something wrong or said something I shouldn't have. But she said, nephew, she said, I see that you're tired. She said, I can see that you're having struggles out there. She said, nephew, I want to remind you why you're walking. And she said, I want you to think about all those ones that can't get up here and walk. She said, I want you to think about all those ones that are in jails or are in hospitals or are handicapped or are no longer here. They can't get up here and walk with you, nephew. She said, you're walking for them. She also said, I want you to think about all those animals and plants that can't write notes and submit them to the DEQ, which is the Department of Environmental Quality for Michigan, and they can't come to these meetings. She said, nephew, you're walking for those ones. And she talked about the plants and the animals and all of our future generations that are coming. And I got this like 20-minute just wicked guilt trip, that was just like, holy man, I could have probably walked to DC from there. And I got really charged. But one of the things that she said to me that really sticks with me before I got out of the car is she says, nephew, I want you to be like water. She said, she goes, when water stops, she said, it gets stagnant and it gets dirty. She said, nephew, always be like water. And I remembered that, and she didn't really define it for me, but definitely made a big impact in my life and my work. Because I don't know if she foreseen the effort that it would take for us to fight against this mine, which we have them on the ropes, and we're just about to win this thing. So hopefully, we're definitely happy about that. But it was a strong effort to do that, and the rights of nature. When we would walk along our beautiful river in our land, every day she would say, "Walk on the earth." Our grandmother, she would say, "Make sure you connect with her. Don't walk on it." In our language, they say "chamokaman." That I guess white people or people from the east is what the word really means. But she'd say, "Don't walk on that. Walk on the earth," she said. And for us at home, our women have the responsibility of caring for that water. They were given that by the Creator, and us men have the responsibility of picking up and taking care of fire. So we support our women when they walk and they carry that copper kettle, and they never let that kettle stop. Once it's in motion, they always got to keep it moving. And I was in awe of our people, because we had probably 50-year-old women that were like, I was almost having to jog to keep up with them. And I was like, holy man. So the whole thing for us, we started to think about. It seemed like right away, we were in catch up mode and trying to figure it out. Almost like building the plane as we're flying. There was a lot of things that we didn't know, a lot of things we were trying to do, but it was always reactive to whatever the mining company was doing. So we did figured out some things that we had to try to do to slow it down. We knew the process. We knew we had to be at meetings. We knew we had to be boisterous and putting in comments and all those things. And it's hard to understand like these very scientific words and things if you're not from that sort of background. But we did our best, and we had some really good people that helped us. So, along this journey, we always wanted to be proactive. All these laws that are in place here in this great Turtle Island here is they're from a Western thought. They're from a Western mind frame, and they see the world completely different than us. This language I'm speaking right now, is a foreign language. It's not from here. My aunt and my relative here that was praying early, that's the original language, of this land. It belongs here. If you close your eyes, you can almost see it describe its environment. That's how connected our languages are to our place and to our land and to our beautiful rivers. The thing about this English language that I've never really understood is that it's a fear-based language. It sees problems and it builds whole things around those problems. And our language is the opposite. Our beautiful sacred languages, they are about love, and they're about connection, and the way the Creator gave those things to us. So when you talk, it's hard to put all that sort of understanding into this this Western framework, a legal work. You almost try hard to translate it, but I talked with Mari about doing something at home, and the first thing we wanted to do was to do a resolution from our tribe to recognize the rights of the Menominee River, our home river, our sacred river, the Minikani Sepe. So we drafted it up, but we drafted it in a way that reflects who we are as Menominees and the way in which we see things, and to let people know that like our clan system and our relationship with the land and the water is so very important to us. And it's not like a template that we can just give to other tribes and say just do this, but maybe some of that language can be used, but more importantly it's about whoever that tribe is, or whoever those people are, that they use their own interpretation, the way they interact with this beautiful mother of ours, and then water and plants and animals and all those things, also the air. So we drafted that rights of nature resolution, and we got that passed unanimously in January of 2020, I believe it was. The idea was that we wanted to first do the resolution and then approach the tribe for a constitutional amendment. And for you guys that don't know us Menominees, we were the very first tribe terminated back in the 50s, when they were terminating tribes, and we still see and feel the effects of that termination. But a lot of those elders that were around at that time and that are still around, when you talk about constitutional amendment or changing the constitution, there's a lot of fear, and there's a lot of just fear around the whole idea of it, which is natural, when you think of what they went through and what they've seen, and their ability to come together in them days and get restored as a tribe. So it's not just a clean cut for us. We have to do a lot of educating our people, just because not only just the termination time, but just rights of nature is very new. But we definitely seen it as a mechanism to exercise our sovereignty as a tribe. Again, I don't speak for the tribe. Our chairman does that. I'm just talking about the work that I've done with them, and the stuff that I do at home, and a lot of times abroad as well. So COVID hit, in March. Our plan was that we were going to start hosting gatherings to be able to educate our people, get them involved. We didn't want to just draft something and say, hey, this is what we're going to do, rather than let's get everybody together. Let's get our whole community together, and let's put this thing together, So after COVID hit, everything kind of just fell apart, like all of you. And I know I do see some masks every now and again, so that's still here. And we kind of had to go back to the drawing board a little bit about what we were going to do. So we kind of came up with this idea, and my relatives, they're not here right now, but we brought a youth group out with us. And they're actually, the driver got sick last night, so they stayed in Bismarck, but they should probably be here later today. I believe they're on the road now. But we took these young boys and we wanted to take them to some of these sacred areas, and we wanted to take them to places that they can meet with the locals that have taken care of this land for a long time. And we wanted to instill within them the love of our earth, the love of our mother here that has been holding us up for so long, that has done so much for us as a people. So we've been doing that, and when we get back home, the idea is we're going to start to put out community gatherings where they're going to talk about this trip and these ceremonies and these things that they've been through. But most importantly, we're going to talk about being in these sacred places with the people, that protect those lands and that have relationship with them. And we've kind of already have a constitutional amendment drafted, but we definitely wanted input from our community. And then hopefully in the fall, we can approach our tribe and come with a constitutional amendment. And I'm pretty sure, if we do it right, we'll get it passed. So I'm excited about that. And again, I'm thankful for you guys listening and being here. Sitting up here sometimes, it almost makes you feel like I'm in bingo. And I say B235. But I think we're gonna take a break now, and then we'll come back into it and go a little bit more into what we're working on and things. And again, thank you to the Lummi and everybody here and Anti-Faith. Yeah.
Thank you. Meantime, if you could be thinking, I see other tribal representatives that have arrived. Did I see Reno from Oglala? Welcome. Be thinking about some of the problems that we've faced, and we've had some big problems on the Missouri. We've had court cases, we've had spirit camps, we've had where we're sitting right now. Until this past year, there would have been a park ranger over here telling us to leave. And so all during my life, they know who I am, so they don't come bother me. But the younger people don't have that knowledge and that support and that awareness that they could say, I have an inherent right to be here, just leave me alone. So I enjoy saying that. I just wait for them to come looking for me. Sometimes they're a little bit slow, but this past year, the park finally conceded that we have a right to come in here without stickers. And so that's been a long time coming, so we can do that now. But the other thing that we're hoping to do as part of our plan is that what Toshka nephew from the nominee talked about is a template. It's a template of grassroots moving what the natural law set in the road for us to follow. Because in tribal government, it's a neo-colonial structure that is modeled after the U.S. government. So it's very constricting. It's a closed system. The roles are defined, and you really have no room to be creative. And it's not criticism. It's just the nature of the beast that came with the occupiers. So those elders that stayed in the borderlands, the grassroots. So the dream that we had when White Swan, when I was a year and a half, the elders talked about it. When I was 12 years old, I was sitting along the river, upriver at Old White Swan with my dad, and we were fishing, and he was watching the old spot, and I could tell he was feeling sad. Iyokshicha yanka. And he said, my girl, when you grow up, you're going to have to do something about this. And I said, I'm only 12 years old. What am I going to do? He said, you'll figure it out. And so still figuring it out, but it's my responsibility to say the same thing to the younger ones. That little guy sitting here that comes from upriver, Takoja comes from Cheyenne River. And so part of that is doing as much intelligence gathering that we can about the structures that have come here, which are hierarchical structures. And in grassroots, the template that Guy is talking about, it's flattening that hierarchy, even in the Oceti Sakowin. We have a hierarchy in our Oceti that is modeled after that neo-colonial structure. It's colonial abuse. So what we have to do is flatten that and make it back into a circle. So that's the work we're doing today, because a lot of times the government is not out on the land and they're not being able to see what is happening every day. Every day there are thousands of cultural sites that are going into the bank. Right here, you're witnessing something about environmental selective racism. So what the Corps did over here, there's an eagle sanctuary to the east. So people can't go there. We go there when we need to for ceremony. But what do they call that when they put the rock? Is it riprap? When they put that along the shore? So they selectively riprapped all on this side. So what happens when the release comes from the dam? It ricochets off the rock and it hits our tribal community. So the erosion, it's almost like a missile effect. It's 4 or 5 times as powerful than when it hits on this side. So there's a road that is almost falling in. So there's so many battles that we're fighting. The payment that came out from the Salazar, Martina, whatever they called him, whoever was in office, when that was taken by the tribes and it was lulled by that, what do you call it, pot pie mentality of scarcity. The tribes needed money. Everybody wanted to be paid. But what they did when they did that settlement is they gave up all rights on the Missouri River, the Black Hills, everything that you could think of from the date that the money came. And we fought it hard, but we weren't, the grassroots were not as powerful enough because there were just too many that wanted the money. So every tribe took it. but in the Oceti, and I think across the nation. But what we can do is from the date that money came, we can still do claims. So what we've done is we created a cultural bioregion movement. 4 years ago, when we left Standing Rock, we thought we could see that because of oppression and captivity, they didn't know what was on the river. Sometimes they argued with each other like we do. And so we thought we're going to go home, like my dad said when we sat on that riverbank. We're going to remember every single thing that is on this river. The Wamakashka, which is animal, I am sacred moving, every Watoto plant, everything. We're going to reacquaint ourselves with the river from Lower Brule down to Yankton, at least 150-mile stretch. We're going to go for co-management with the Corps of Engineers. And so we have, I just saw him walk in somewhere. Joseph, where are you? You want to stand up? This is our data scientist. He's gone through, talk about oppression. What happens in Indian country when you have math background and they tell you to find out why the school is failing? So you do the study and you find out, what did they do? They fire you, right? So he's gone through the trenches. He knows what happens when you reveal the truth. So we're basing our bioregion work on maps that Joseph and his team out of Tufts University. They're coming in a couple weeks to do water tests, our own water tests. And Reno, I hope you can come when we do that. And our goal is to raise the level of quality water above EPA. So our standard will be higher. So we've got a team coming together, and we've created these dream teams of spiritual leaders, scientists, youth. We have a youth. I think Matonki is going to come. She's going to make a statement. But a lot of it is grassroots work. But we have to be in relationship with the elected leadership because we need that role. The government sometimes won't listen to us unless there's a TIPO there, unless there's a elected leader. We also have elected leaders in treaty committee. I recognize a treaty member here from Lower Brule. Welcome. So the key is trying to get those stray cats work together. The treaty committee, the elected leadership, and the grassroots. And we did that with KXL Pipeline. For 13 years, we signed the international treaty to protect the sacred. And it was hell getting to everybody to work together for the first couple of years, but we did it. We were successful, and it was all about this river. We fought for her. So before we take a break, I'm going to ask Michinkshi Padani Kokipeshni if you could come up and maybe talk about some of the challenges that we have to address in this rights of the river, because they have structures in place. With TIPOs, it's kind of a colonial constraint because it's created by the government and they can't stop, but they just mitigate. But still, when they can border cross between the grassroots, the government, and whoever else, we can still achieve it. We just have to be really ninja about it. And we have to figure out what we can do. And so that's what we're working into the bioregion. Daki hinkta. Nichaje.
Hamidakyapi Padani Kokipeshne Emachapo Washichu Chaje Kipsparadigo Ihanktuan Sichangu Emataha Magaska Tioshpa Emataha. My name is Kip Spotted Eagle. I'm currently serving as the representative on the Tribal Historic Preservation Officer for the Yankton Sioux tribe. Prior to that, I went to school down at Haskell. I got a degree in American Indian Studies, and the whole purpose for me getting that degree was cultural preservation. That's kind of what I do, what I help with, and what I continue to strive for when working for the TIPO office. It's hard being a TIPO, and I encourage everybody that has a THPO in their tribe to work with them, especially like when looking at infrastructure projects coming towards the Oceti or your nation. We'll get those letters 5-6 years ahead of time. So if you know that those letters are coming, or if you have people that work with the TIPO office, because we can give our letter of, we don't agree with it, we concur there's no historical spots being destroyed, sure, but it's never, no, you can't build this, because we facilitate mitigate construction. And it's a hard thing to do because there's places that I don't want a road to be resurfaced or widened because I know that there's sites, but within the colonial construct of what we're dealing with, archaeology and anthropology, those are hard to mitigate. I think on the river right now, and I mean, I feel comfortable in talking about it just because we took care of it and we did it in a good way, but human remains are constantly coming out of the riverbank, and those are our people. I know that I think 2 years ago we had some relatives come out that were 1,500 years old, and they were laying and resting for that long. And then the flood practices of the Corps of Engineers and how they manage the water in the upper lake have brought those relatives out. And it was 2 children and probably their mother, and they were painted in red ochre, and there was a bundle burial and everything that I mean, you get into the archaeological part of it, Pelican Lake era, you know um, Arrowhead, 1600 years ago. So they never once thought that on the top of the hill, 200 feet down where the original river would be, that their bodies or anything about them would be encroached upon, but they were. And so constantly, like, that is like one of my major concerns, because in archaeology they consider the sites that exist outside of the river as associated features, but the river itself and everything around it is a sacred site. The only reason that those things are there is because the water is life. Those wouldn't be there if it wasn't for the river or for the water. And so I'm always arguing that it needs to be, the entire Missouri River basin needs to be considered a sacred site, and everything in a buffer zone should be protected, because it's constantly going to be showing itself. Our people were here. There's no way to erase that. And I think that by putting boundaries, the core boundaries, the state boundaries, returning federal land that was supposed to come back to the tribes, to the state, and then now the state manages it, and we have to go against the state that's adversarial to our native people, on protecting our sites. That's a hard thing. Now, getting into the water issue, we have intakes in the river that don't belong to us. We have winter doctrines rights that we shouldn't be paying for water coming out of the Missouri River, but we pay the utility, for our water. I've heard it said by, I think, Wes Martell, any surplus water is Indian water. That's just how it should be. Once it goes through the dam and they got done making electricity out of it, everything that comes out, it should be tribal. But that's not how it is. And as a TIPO, watching these infrastructure projects, I just am going to give a real big warning to all the other tribes that they're coming for your water. There's straws coming to this river to places where they ruin their water. They ruin their water with CAFOs. They ruin their water with the pollution from the industrial complex. And now they realize their water tables are gone. And there's places like this, your homes, where the water's clean, they're going to come for it. And so what do? How do we protect that? We have to look at as a living being, as a relative that we have to protect, and right now it's not being protected. The other big problem around here is pesticides. What are they doing with glyphosates? Sure, it came out that it causes cancer, but how much did they cut down on it, and how much does it go into the river? The intakes are right below some of the biggest ag fields around here. We just don't have those answers. Those are some of the issues. The other thing is, when we have a flood year, they shut this river down here, and you could walk almost to the middle. You get a huge influx of people coming here, and I just wanted to walk out there and see what's out there. No, you're a pot hunter. The Corps of Engineers doesn't have the right to detain or ticket, but they have some kind of, I don't know what they do. The Park Service, they just declared from here all the way to, I think, Sioux City, the wild and scenic river. So now the river has become a national park. And in my mind, if it's a federal park, they should observe our federal treaty of fishing and hunting rights, because I mean, we're on a treaty base with the feds. So that's something that I would like to work with the other tribes on this, is now that it's a national park, they should recognize treaty rights. I mean, they should do that on the state level, but it should be easier on the federal level. There's a lot of things that the Corps does and the state do. The tribes are always an afterthought. It's like, oh, but it could have been different, if they work with tribes first. And that's the paradigm that's been set by the Fed, is that you always bring in the tribes last, and then the tribe comes in and everything has been paid for, everything's been drawn, everything has been planned, and then the tribe comes in and says you have to change it. So that's adversarial. That's setting the stage for conflict between tribes and feds, tribes and state, whatever agency. So I've always encouraged, like, all the local agencies, before you do anything, just talk to us. Have the simple courtesy to talk to us about, is this a good idea? No, that's not a good idea. There's a huge burial area over there. That would alleviate a lot of conflict, but it's like, we don't have the right to grieve. We don't have the right to feel bad about those people that came out. That's just part of progress. But that never will set right with me. I mean, I've taken part in several reburials, and you'll never ever get used to the fact that you're putting someone to rest like a skull. Like, this person had the right to be at rest. So I think that for the river and for what's going on, the other thing is the Corps of Engineers has a list of looters. They have a list of looters that go up and down this river. And I'm like, what do you do with that list? Well, we've turned it over to the feds. And I was like, well, you should turn it over to the tribes too, so we can watch them. But I was like, can I get that list? Well, that's kind of, our own, that's for law enforcement. But they don't have anybody that's enforcing against looting on the river. So there's so many things that are wrong with just the river itself. But the other thing is they're disconnecting, like, our ability to have anything to say with it, because they're coming for your water. I mean, it comes down to, eventually, this is the most precious resource going right here. And, whether they pollute it or whether they utilize it for their own families to drink and live. Last night in Sweat, Galen had said, tomorrow they're going to talk about how this here, and making a declaration, how this is our bloodline. This is our bloodline. Yankton Oyate, this is our bloodline, because this is where we drink our water. This is where we get our water. This is where everybody in, like, the Midwest gets their water. So this has everything to do with your blood. And if we can't protect it, then it's going to taint not just your blood, but your children's blood. So I think that the TIPO office has a unique ability to tell grassroots, 6 years from now, they're going to replace that bridge up there at Platte Winter Bridge. It's going to happen next year. Not just only for the fact that it's coming, but I mean, it would have been good for the tribes to have a concrete company, a 8A concrete company. I mean, if you think if you have to, like, come out of this and work with it and figure out how to come forward, your TIPO offices know that there's huge infrastructure projects coming. So grassroots should be working, tribes should be working, economic development, they should be working with the TIPO departments, because it's a picture into what's coming. And it's really hard for us, because people are like, well, you're the TIPO, stop it. And it's like, all I can make them do is follow the law. And they have thousands of lawyers, like, that figure out how to get through the law. And I think most TIPOs are operating on a very minimal budget. For my office, I have 3 staff. I get like $70,000 a year. So, I mean, we can't do much. I can sign letters, send letters, read letters, but it's stymied us into this position. I think eventually, if the tribe gets to a point where they're more economically stable, the best thing is to pull away from federal funding and fund their TIPO to go after, because then you're not obligated. As a TIPO, you sign this thing that says that you're obligated to do these things in the name of the federal government. So it's a hard position to hold because you're not actually, a lot of people are wanting you to stand up for it, but like you still have to facilitate it. But when it comes to water, I guess my main point is talk to your tippos about what infrastructure are coming towards your water, because the water ones are the ones that will be like 5, 6, 7 years. They'll start sending small letters. There's one coming right now, and they're trying to get a Fonzie on it. There's a valley up by Gregory County. They want to put a dam across the valley. They want to create a reservoir by pumping the water out of the Missouri River, and then they want to run it through a turbine, and it's called the forebay. So what they'll do is that's how they're going to do hydroelectric, is to pump it into this reservoir and drop it down by gravity through a turbine. But that's kind of up by Whetstone and Spotted Tail's camp. So it's like we're always going to be at odds with major infrastructure projects. But that one's coming. That's going to be a big fight because it's one of the most beautiful, pristine valleys, and they want to put it underwater. So, but I just want to thank the carver. Is he here? Oh yeah. Thank you for coming. This is amazing, and I appreciate it. And welcome to Yankton Sioux, and say prayers with that and send it, and that it makes movement. But I kind of sound like doom and gloom with the TIPO office, but it's a hard thing working with infrastructure.
Ofira. It's almost like we have to have a Iktomi patrol. In Nez Perce, what they call it, Itziaye. And then what do they call the trickster in the Lummi? Anyway, all the tribes have a trickster. And so the Corps is the only stakeholder on the Missouri River, the only one. There's no stakeholders, even though it's a transboundary river. The water serves 20 million people, but they're always very, very sneaky. And so we almost need an office to keep an eye on them about everything, because this recent DAPO thing that happened, before it was dismissed by the judge recently, they sent out a letter to the 4 tribes that here's how sneaky they are. The 4 tribes that were filing suit, and Yankton was one of them. It was Oglala, Yankton, Cheyenne River, and Standing Rock. So they send out this letter. They say, just happy letter saying, we're now at this point. It just makes it sound really good. It's like Iktomi killing the ducks. And it says, we would like for you to be a cooperating agency in coming up with an EIS. So they put in the Federal Register, in doing this EIS, that they were going to use the very same 2 EAs that were done previously that were struck down by the judge. And so the 3 Teton tribes sent letters, and they said, we will be a cooperating agency. We tried to warn them and say, don't do it. They just want you to be under their cloak if you're the key word was cooperating. I like to be resistant. So at Yankton, Kip and I talked to them, and we said, don't sign it. Don't sign it. So we sent a letter, and we said, we just want nation to nation. And so we got to send out that letter next week, but we want them to meet with us directly on the EIS, because they're using the faulty EA that they did in the first place. It says that in the Federal Register. So you have to have a team that just tracks them constantly, because they always scheme a way to outsmart us. And so hopefully the Teton can get out of that status of being a cooperating agency. They've already signed, the 3 chairmen have, so we're encouraging them to retract that. And we're going to go for nation to nation here pretty soon. But even in nation to nation, those have to be finely designed. They are not for oratory and political speeches. They're acts of war. So when you go into a discussion with them, first of all, you say it's not a consultation. And you have to watch them constantly. These TIPO offices need to be manned for like 20 people in there to keep an eye on what's going. And so in our bioregion, we're trying to survey everything in the Oceti before the infrastructure projects come. So the TIPOs probably need to get together. We need to figure out how to enlarge them, and then have the grassroots work more closely with them so we can survey everything before the projects come. We need to figure out our cultural maps. We need to GPS them. So that's what the cultural bioregion, which involves 5 states, and it's a watershed. So that's the move. We have to go larger than we think we are. Um, I think we should take a break before I get carried away here. Um, and we'll come back in about 10 minutes and then we'll have, I see Matagi, one of our youth came, and we'd love to hear from her, and then we'll get back to work on the proclamation. And the bathrooms are over there. And I think there's still coffee. Uh-huh. But let's get back together, and we're going to go forward. And all this time that we're talking, if our guides, where's Mari and Guy and others who've worked on this, just keep in mind there's some paper up here, there's some pens, but jot down things that you think we need to be cognizant of as we develop our proclamation. At some point soon, I'm going to ask Guy to read the Menominee one, so you could get a feel for what one sounds like. And of course, ours will not be a copy of that, but at least we get a feel for it. So I want you to be thinking about that. And then there's Mario Gonzalez always says, always keep a historical record for when you go into court. Hopefully we won't have to go into court, but when we go into those spaces, whether it's the UN, whether it's within the Oceti, we always got to have witness of who is here. This is the first meeting on the rights of the river. So you want to hold that paper up? Or where's the sign-in sheet? Who has the sign-in sheet? Okay, so if you could make sure that you get your name on there, that's the historical record that will kick off and what we ask for help with the spirits. Very, very important. So I'm going to go ahead and after this young lady talks, I'm going to ask Guy to read their proclamation. You want to come up, my girl? Introduce yourself. This is our future. We have youth all over the reservation. Those of us that are older, this is the dream that they will carry these things on. They will bring this to fruition when she's as old as I am, and hopefully I'll be recycled by then. I'll be a little teenager, and she'll tell me to behave. But this is part of our future, and she has some comments as a young Ihangtua that she's going to share with us. Introduce yourself.
Ha mitaki yapi, matangi iatala amachiapi kishto, lakomi chaze ki magaju shawi, and machiapi kishto, ihangtwa and mataha. Na leha mardi elwati kishto, inawa ye ki Danny Zephyr ichiapi, na atewa ye ki tama iatala echiapi kishto, chante washdeya nape chiuzapi kishto. Hello, everyone. My name is Matangi Fa'atimu Imuana Iatala. In my Samoan language, that means blue rain on a stormy night. My Lakota and Nakota ancestors call me Red Rain Woman. I'm honored to speak here in front of you today. And I greet you all with a warm-hearted handshake. I would like to thank Unchi Faith for inviting me to talk here, as I think it is very important for us to hear from the Indigenous youth. So thank you, Faith. I would like to talk today about the importance of water. When preparing this speech, I asked myself two questions. What is water, or why is water important to us as a people? And what does water mean to our future generations? I think it is important to honor water, as we have the great Missouri River right next to us. And I'm sure that most of you, including myself, grew up enjoying these rivers and the waters. For me, it's definitely a perk and a great gift. And I have many memories of being able to come and fish on the water. And I think it's a very huge privilege to be able to drink clean water, bathe in water, and just play in it. And while our planet as a whole may never run out of water, it is important to remember that clean water is not always available when and where it is needed. We are a people who always thought 7 generations ahead of us. Water is essential to all living beings. I think it is really important and very necessary about the conversations that we're having here today. I do like that we're bringing awareness to the problems we're facing and conserving water. We must realize this important distinction as well. We are not only defending Mother Earth, but we are also a piece of Mother Earth who is protecting herself. I would like to thank you again, Faith, for giving me this platform. I would also like to thank the water protectors for their efforts in protecting our river and stopping the Dakota access pipeline. A lot of people here grew up around the teachings of honoring and protecting water, and my hopes are that many generations after us may enjoy it too. I want to acknowledge the water protectors who are currently on the front lines of stopping drilling of Line 3 within the Shell River in the northern Minnesota with our Anishinaabe relatives. May their water source remain protected. And may you think of the 2 questions I asked today. And thank you for your time.
Thank you. She laid out our work for us. Thank you. She's also a barista. Yankton barista. So, Guy, you want to give us context with what yours sounds like? Anything you want to add on there? If you want to dance or sing?
I don't know. I could throw out some Freddie Fender if anybody knows any of that. Maybe some Hank Williams. I was talking to my brother over here, Wolf. He was asking me if there's anything we could do about the rights of fry bread or come out Jesus. Why? Maybe not the guy to talk to. Maybe there's Mari or somebody. But I just wanted to share a little bit of our resolution here, and the way in which we kind of went about this. So this is the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin Resolution number 1952, recognition of the rights of the Menominee River. It states as, whereas we, the Menominee people, who are beautiful, strong, tall, and brimming with humility. It doesn't say that. No, I'm just kidding. I forgot. I'm reading something else. Sorry. It says, whereas we, the Menominee people, are indigenous to, to what is now known as the state of Wisconsin. Our place of origin was at the mouth of the Menominee River, where the 5 clans of the Menominee were created and included the Owassa, the bear, Kane, the eagle, Moa, the wolf, Mose, the moose, and Otachia, the crane. And we continue to live on our ancestral land that was granted by Machawatuk, the Great Spirit, the Creator. And whereas the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin is a federally recognized Indian tribe, as provided by the Menominee Restoration Act, December 22nd, 1973, whole bunch of numbers and blah, blah, blah. Whereas the tribe, acting through its duly elected governing body, the Menominee Tribal Legislature, has powers to make and enforce laws, negotiate with federal, state, and local governments, and otherwise exercise its powers consistent with the limitations imposed by its constitution and bylaws. And whereas at one time the tribe occupied a land base estimated at 10 million acres, including lands now known as Wisconsin and Upper Michigan. And whereas through a series of 7 treaties entered into with the United States, the tribe witnessed its land base erode to little more than 235,000 acres, comprising its present-day reservation. And whereas the tribe's sacred place of origin exists within the 1836 treaty territory at the mouth of the Menominee River, a mere 60 miles east of its present reservation. And whereas a result of the tribe's undeniable ties and long occupation of the Menominee River area, there are numerous Menominee sacred sites and burial mounds along the Menominee River. And whereas the location of the Menominee River is historically and culturally significant to the Menominee people due to the existence of cultural properties by way of raised agricultural fields, funerary objects, multiple mounds, burial sites, and villages which constitute a cultural landscape of historic significance. And whereas it is the tribe's position that any disturbance or unanticipated discovery stemming from such sites necessitates that all activity shall cease, the area be secured and protected, the Menominee Tribal Historic Preservation Officer be contacted, and the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin's concurrence be obtained. And whereas the tribe is committed to responsible stewardship to protect the tribe's cultural resources, water, environment, wildlife, and animals that occupy lands within the tribe's historical range, and whereas the tribes understands and recognizes that water is essential to life, and that the Menominee River is, in fact, the very origin of life for the Menominee people. And whereas the Menominee River also provides life to Michigan and Wisconsin residents and all natural wildlife within the Great Lakes ecosystem. And whereas the Menominee River faces significant threats from climate change, pollution, the proposed open pit mine known as the Back 40 project, which is poised to cause harmful impacts to water, humans, wildlife, animals, environment, and cultural properties as demonstrated with other minds of similar nature. And whereas the tribe recognizes that we live at a time of unprecedented species extinction, ecosystem collapse, and global warming. And whereas the tribe recognizes that environmental laws which regulate the use and exploitation of nature are incapable of protecting the Menominee River and Mother Earth. And whereas the tribe recognizes to protect the Menominee River, it must secure the highest protections for the river through the recognition of the river's inherent and legal rights. Now, therefore, be it resolved that by this tribal resolution, the Menominee Indian Tribe of Wisconsin declares that 1. The Menominee River possesses inherent and legal rights, including the right to naturally exist, flourish, regenerate, and evolve, the right to restoration, recovery, and preservation, the right to abundant, pure, clean, unpolluted water, the right to natural groundwater recharge and surface water recharge, the right to a healthy natural environment and natural biodiversity, the right to natural water flow, the right to carry out its natural ecosystem functions, and the right to be free of activities or practices, as well as obstructions that interfere with or infringe upon these rights. And number 2, the tribe is dedicated to recognizing and protecting the inherent and legal rights of the Menominee River and assisting our neighboring tribes, as well as other governments, to recognize and protect the legal rights of the Menominee River. And it just says, we, the undersigned officers of the Menominee Tribal Legislature, hereby certified on January 16th, 2020, with a quorum of 7-4, 0 opposed, 0 abstentions. And also to the legislator, they were all like, well, let's do that, but what about our rivers here at home, and what about our reservation here at home? So they're all ready to, it seemed to me, to move on our own reservation, and surrounding lands. But I thought I was trying to tell them that I think that it was important that we start with our place of origin as a people, because it's the imminent threat of it is happening right now. But when we get home, that's what we're going to do. We already have some language drafted. We're going to hold some informational sessions at home. I feel like it's just getting people to understand that we already do this at home. We already practice, sustainability and protecting our rights of nature. We are well known worldly for the way in which we manage and cut our forest. Our forest is a sustainable forest. It's what they say that Wisconsin looked like prior to European invasion. We've cut our whole forest over, they say, 9 times already, but it's full of woodlands. It's probably 90% woods and wild areas. And we're taking that same approach just to get people to understand that, like, we're not asking you to do more. We're just saying, let's keep doing what we're doing, but let's call it this. And so it gives us a basis to operate in the legal framework that it has. How did I get so handsome? I know that's on everybody's mind. Oh, copy for sure. Yep. Oh.
So that gives us some direction for discussion. So we're going to open it up here. But one of the things that I want to mention is that all of this is about strategy. It's like that old saying, the art of war. We're just coming out of a 13-year battle against KXL, and we were successful. And I remember in the early, yes, the river needs to hear you. Yes. When we went in there, I remember the tribal officials coming up and saying, I don't know why you're doing that. They're going to put it in anyway. I wish I had time to get apologies from them, but that would take a long time. But the point was that we had several things that we did that were different that we used to do a long time ago. There were old new teachings, is that we tried to get away from just making speeches because it's time consuming. I think there is a goal that we become orators at appropriate times to motivate, inspire, and lead the people. And there are times and places for that. And there's plenty of time to practice, like at bingo and various other places. But I think that we would say this is not the time for you to talk about how many years you were up on the hill. This is not the time to talk about how many sundances you were in. Those are important, but they come through our actions. And so what we did is we made sure that we did really in-depth research about KXL, TransCanada, and we always tried to stay ahead of what they were doing. And then we swallowed our pride. We asked the Nebraska farmers to come up and to join with us. That was really hard because they're very arrogant and they always center themselves. There were a lot of tears, there were conflicts, there were fights. When we did that action on the mall in DC, the camp almost broke apart because of the cultural differences in the centering. But we got through it and it made us stronger. Some people stepped out, some people stepped in. But the point was that we always went back to the map. We always went back to the center to say, what is it that we need to do? And then we have to study the documents of the enemy. The biggest thing that is holding us from going forward, Reno and the Oglala representatives, we're talking about the master manual. The master manual is the weaponized document that keeps us subservient on the Missouri River. So in 1999, when the graves uncovered up the river, there were like 45 of our relatives that were uncovered. And when they came up, it was in December. And so I went down to the Corps and I said, Tom Curran, you need to stop the river. Our relatives are coming up all over. And he said, sorry, Faith, Omaha calls the shots. Can't do anything. And I said, you have to, he said, if you can do something by Friday, go ahead, but the water's coming up. And I was just crying and I left and I tried to get the leadership to move forward. There's only one in the leadership. So you have to find that person in leadership that is willing to risk something to work with the grassroots. And sometimes you have to get other people to get them to do it. So I called Uncle Vine, Deloria, and I called him and I was crying and I said, Dexy, I don't know what to do. And I was just sobbing around and he said, wipe your tears and listen. Quit crying. You got work to do. I don't know if any of you knew Dixie, but he was kind of gruff. And so I was wiping my tears and he said, right now, you get yourself a good lawyer, one that has, and he said, excuse me, balls. But, and you get a TRO. You get a temporary restraining order. And I didn't know what it was. I didn't even know what NAGPR was in 1999. And he said, I worked on that law. And he said, it's for this purpose. So it took us $200,000 to get the Corps to talk to us. And in the court decision, it said that consultation does not constitute silence. It says it in the court decision. So they forced us they stopped the river for 6 weeks and we called ACHP. Another gatekeeper is the Advisory Council on Historic Preservation. They're appointed by the president, so they're political creatures. Valerie Hauser is on there and she's worked hard. Some of you know her. And she has seen our viewpoint, but she's still a federal servant. And so we called them and we said, you need to come down here. We did publicity. Our people criticized us for the publicity, but we had to get the attention. So they came out here, the ACHP, and they were horrified at what was on the river. There was a guy named Alan Stanfield in Denver that was at their office and he came down and he told me, he called me at 11:30 at night at the spirit camp. And he said, you know, Faith, I'm going to go ahead and foreclose on the river. Foreclose means that they're going to sever the PA. He said, I'll probably get fired because it's not politically popular, but I'm going to recommend that they foreclose the programmatic agreement. So because of the battle that we had, which took 3 or 4 months and zero weather, they foreclosed the programmatic agreement. We refused to sign it. I think the other tribes have signed it. We've tried to get a nation to nation. The Corps is resisting because the other tribes always give in when somebody tries to resist. So we're fractured. So if we do this, out of what we learned about 13 years of KXL is we really do have to figure out how we can become open systems and not closed off to each other. We are children of the river. We're not just Oglala. We're not just Yankton. We're not just Mni Sosa or whatever the tribe is or the band. So we have to think beyond that we are children of this river. So if we could think in those terms, one of them is the master manual that is keeping us in place. But before we go and make more speeches and take up all the time and the meeting's over, We got to study that document and figure out strategy-wise, what are we going to do with it? How do we destroy it? How do we burn it and start all over? How do we resist it? So we got to have a game plan for the master manual. One of the lawyers that has really done some good work in that is Peter Capicello. I think he's with the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance. And the good thing is that your body is somewhat independent from the tribes. So it's in a good place in grassroots to be able to pull us together. Because a lot of times when you get into the political structures, they're hierarchies and they politics, elections, and all of that. So grassroots is really important in this movement. The other thing is we are in a point of time where in the Farm Bill and also the Forest Service, the Park Service, if you look at their philosophies, this is where the research and the young people that are computer savvy, we really need to get our teams to study everything that is mandating federal agencies. I just got a call from about 2 months ago from Reed Robinson. Does anybody know Reed? You folks know him? He is the head of the National Tribal Liaison for the Forest Service, and he got promoted in the Biden administration. So he called me up and he said the Biden administration mandated executive orders that are on 4 or 5 pages that they are mandated to follow. We probably don't even know those. I didn't know that. And the people, the plants inside the Forest Service called me and they said, most of the supervisors are not going to abide by this. But if you know as tribes what those are, you can make them step up to the plate. So they sent me those, and there are a lot of, there's a lot of language in the executive orders that we can use. So I did a keynote for their supervisors, and I think I upset them. But the ones who invited me said at least we gave notice that they're supposed to follow those executive or their social environmental justice orders. So we need to thoroughly understand what they mandate so we can hold them to task. And the other thing is that we can ask what we're going to do here locally with the help of the TIPO, the elected leaders, and the treaty committee, and the grassroots Braveheart. We're going to ask for co-management of Lake Andes. They flooded us. They destroyed our community. Clearly mismanagement. And now they're building a new office for themselves. So we're going to request co-management with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife. This was done with Jim Stone is here, and he might be familiar with that with the Salish Kootenai. They asked to co-manage their buffalo in the Salish Kootenai Park, I think it was, and they were granted that. And so we have to look at 638 projects through federal programs like the Forest Service and the Park Service. We could potentially do that with co-management on this river, but we have to have the minds, the spirits, and the ability to follow through and the ability to work. We have a lot of people who don't show up for work. So we got to make sure that when we create these teams, they're the ones that are going to follow through. We have a tribal word that in our Dakota, Lakota language, we have a word called Doksha. You Lakota speakers, you know what Doksha, they say, well, come to the meeting. We'll say Doksha. That means like maybe sometime. My dad said, you know what Doksha means, really? It means dog shit. He said, remember that, my girl. He said, anybody who tells you Doksha, you know what that means. Don't depend on them. And so keep that in mind. We got to have people who have that ability to watch their behavior. People like speeches, but you got to watch the behavior of follow through. Because this is a hard fight. You have to know science, which we knew, Indigenous science. We met with the Corps in Sioux City. There's a group called the Missouri River Recreational IEC. What's that stand for? What is Mr. Rick? Missouri River Recreational Recovery and Implementation. Okay, that's like a fake thing. It's a fake act by the federal government that created this for the two birds and the fin, right? The plover, what's the other one? And the sturgeon. So federal act put money in there for all the stakeholders on the Missouri River. The people who are most active are the non-native people. There are 28 tribes that are on that, but only 2 or 3 tribes go because it's Doksha. It's mostly that they pre-construct it. It's scientific. You don't get the handouts till you go to the meeting. So you almost have to create um, a war movement within that to get those 28 tribes to come together. And some of those 28 tribes have been domesticated and mesmerized to say, oh, the Corps calls me all the time. Of course they call you because they want you to agree with them. So we have to, that's one body that we could potentially change. If we could get those 28 tribes to come together, then we could, because we have endangered species that are medicines. So we have to figure out how do we work with Mr. Rick and change that. If they know that we're doing that, they're probably going to turn on us. But there's so many bodies like that that we have to infiltrate. And so a lot of that is just going to take hours of sitting in circles and figuring out who's going to take this, who's going to take on this skirmish and this battle. But it's exciting because we now have the people power to do that. We have young people who have environmental backgrounds. We have lawyers, we have data scientists, we have biologists, we have our tribal member, Jim Stone, back there. He's got a biology degree. He's lost right now. He's managing the casino. But think about some comments that you want. I'm going to give it out to the audience and some of the thoughts that have come up to you for you, and we'll write them down, keep in your notes, and let's go for that. And then after that, I'm going to have Jim talk. Any thoughts that come to mind? Let your spirit think about what we need to think about. Where we'll go from now is I've talked to the Lower Brule people, talked to my treaty committee, the Braveheart grandmas, and then we'll go to the leadership. But we probably will go to Lower Brule next for the next meeting. And then out of this, we want to form a steering committee so we can go to work. Lots of work and probably get a grant. We do have some money in our bioregion where we could kick it off. So any thoughts? Uh-huh.
Yes.
My name's Reno Red Cloud. I'm with the Oglala Sioux Tribe Water Resource Department. I'm the 6th generation of Chief Red Cloud, but I worked for my tribe for over 30 years. And I'm with the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance, and I'm with the Water Resource Department. But I know Faith. I met her a couple times previously in a lot of these meetings where we're fighting for our water rights. And like with the Keystone XL pipeline, that was probably one of the greatest decisions I've come across, all of us, because of the oil pipeline being, taken out by the Biden administration. But through my years of working in water, I started with the Mni Water Project. I worked there for many years, and then I moved on to the Water Resource Department where I'm at now. But I went from actually working in water now to administering our water code. And we all individually have our tribal water codes, but I'd like to see all the tribes come together and get a document or a tribal water code with all of the tribes together. That would be the first step. Then from that document, getting unification, then moving forward with it, read up on the master manual and see just exactly where our position is in it. To me, we're just mentioned. We're not even part of the water permitting process, the decision making. We're just mentioned with our water rights. Winter's Doctrine, treaty water rights. Mentioned, yeah, they give us tribal consultation, but I don't even think they do that. They just oversee us. 99% of the time, the decisions are made, and it's a formality for them to come see us. But we gotta identify, respond, and try to get some kind of resolution on this. And I think that getting together, getting our position, see where we're at in the master manual, like you said, strategizing. There's 28 tribes along the Missouri River Basin, and Mr. Rick, I used to go to them, but we had no position in that group. They just wanted us at the table just to show that we're there because it's part of their act or whatever, the Water Resource Act. But the majority of Mr. Rick is orientated by the lower, how'd you say, the upper basin, lower basin, because of navigation, hydropower, they gave us a voice and through cultural resources and water supply because of all the we have the Mni Wachoni, then all the Yankton Sioux tribe, Standing Rock, Cheyenne River have the intakes for their water systems, but we just have a role there, but they don't really hear our voice. Mr. Rick is not the place to address our tribal issues. I've seen that the hard way because I brought up issues over and over, but it's there's a lot of stakeholders in Mr. Rick. A lot of them are for the tribes like Missouri, Nebraska, South Dakota, North Dakota. But the tribal representation is there, but it's not. You don't have no voice. It's not the place to take your tribal issues. So I've seen that, and that's why right now I'm just moving forward with the Great Plains Tribal Water Alliance. I am a board member. Standing Rock, Rosebud, Flandreau, Santee Sioux Tribe. Um, Four of us, Ogallala, but we're expanding now, trying to get, I think, Lower Brule, get a representative from them. But we're moving forward with a lot of issues. Keystone XL, but right now we're fighting uranium mining issues. We're aware of the DAPL issue that's ongoing with the EIS. With my personal opinion with that, why are you having a NEPA process when the oil's already flowing? You know, it's just that after the fact. It's just, but then again, that's the importance. What Faith's saying, we got to come together to get our voice heard. We got to strategize to get identify what we need to do and then follow through. So, but I'm glad I'm here today because you know with my prayers with the totem pole too. All our tribes in the United States, prayer is probably our most powerful thing. Our religion, our culture. So I'm just glad I'm here today, and what little input I can offer, I'm thankful. Thank you.
Anybody else thinking out loud? Huh?
How many tribes have along the river have declared like environmental rights of the environment?
None. Just the Iowa. Yeah. Yep. Today is the start. Yeah. Right.
But we have to declare that the rights of the environment first.
Yep. Gumption. Absolutely. We kind of broke some ground with KXL. We wrote a resolution on the MMIW, and we wrote it identical for each of the tribes. We came to the Oglalas, we went to Lower Brule, we went to Yankton, Rosebud, and the resolution was identical. One of the issues was to have the TAP with all the tribes. I think you guys have the TAP system in place, that national database. Other ones were law enforcement issues because they were all over the map in regard to MMIW. So we kind of broke ground. But I think with the water codes, do you have a water code at Oglala? You do. Okay, so we need to have a session with you. We drafted a water code, and from what Wes Martell from Wind River said, there's only 12 tribes that have water codes in the U.S. That's not very many. But if every one of the tribes on the Missouri could meet together for the specific reason to put those water codes together, that would be regulatory and enforceable. And I think my son Kip with the TIPO was talking constantly about intakes. We need to figure out how we begin using the water. Economically, spiritually, culturally, we need to get intakes. But that's going to take resources. Any other thoughts? Maybe culturally? Nick, you have any thoughts? No? Oh, you had a... This is Jennifer View. She's a... oh, she can talk about herself.
We're still in the morning, so good morning. Hi, I'm Dr. Jennifer Vayu, and I'm a member of Braveheart Society, and I live here in the Yankton territory and have been working with Faith since 2016, and Judith LeBlanc. And I'm non-native, and I do want to state this to the non-native accomplices and allies who are out there or listening or watching. We have a role, and that is to be supportive of our native counterparts or our native friends and relatives to uphold in our roles. So, like, for instance, I'm a river geographer and I study rivers around the world. So what I can do is bring some of that knowledge here and some of the experience from other places and the treaties that have been formed between nations and official agreements, but also the science behind what goes on and why something like that master manual is impenetrable. You can't just sit down and read it. It's not in layperson's language. Mr. Rick is set up as a very, the power disparity of hard power and soft power, like where you have this discussion going on over the heads of the stakeholders, though the meeting is supposed to be for the stakeholders. So going to that, listening and analyzing it, these are things that I can do in my role. And so non-natives, what can you all do in your role to uphold the leadership of the Indigenous movement, however that's going to formulate, is not really our business, but to uphold what is decided and what the leadership says about how to, not just protect the river, but to rebuild relationship with the river and return the obligations, because it's about relationality and obligation and responsibility. So, the accountability part of not trying to co-opt or not trying to come in and override, but instead being good to stand beside or even behind. So I just wanted to share that in there. Yes. Yeah. So in some other places in the world, you have government to government agreements that have occurred on waterways that are shared between countries. So there's a great database called the Transboundary Freshwater Dispute Database that is managed at Oregon State University. And it holds over 500 agreements and treaties between countries that can be referenced for how the tribes can negotiate with the US government, being that it's nation to nation. So looking at those as a model, there are examples, contemporary examples of things like cost benefit sharing. So, you have this dam sitting within eye view here. It's touching the reservation, yet the electricity generated by the dam is sold out, right, in the market, in the free market, putting economics before any other value. So here, this river displaced White Swan community, which is just a little further up the river here, if we were on top of the dam, we could see where that was. The people were displaced, but what was the compensation? Some money? A relocation plan? Did they move some houses? But if we were to talk about this in today contemporary situations, there could be a lot of bargaining and negotiation that goes on with what the river will then be used for. If it's used for electricity generation, why isn't the tribe getting free electric? Why is every time somebody can't pay their electric bill, it gets shut off, you got to pay $500 to get it turned back on? This is like an undue burden on people that are not allowed to use the river freely in the traditional way that, or the cultural way that they have used it in the past, because that dam got slammed into the landscape. So there's very successful cost benefit sharing that goes on between countries like Nepal and India have agreements. If a country like Thailand builds a dam in Laos, then there'll be agreements that are made with the construction of that dam. Maybe the Thai construction goes in and builds it, and then the Lao government agrees to send 70% of the power to Thailand because of that. So there's different agreements that can be made, and this is not lost. We can revisit what the agreements were at the time and figure out what has been honored and what hasn't been honored as far as the U.S. government PICS loan project. And Nick can speak a lot more to that as a historian studying the project. But, there's definitely examples around the world of better ways to do this in a cooperative fashion so that the benefit doesn't all go toward an economic of a dominant system. whatever that system might be. In this case, it's the US government, really. And that, this river is a national river. It's not, everything along here is decided at a federal level, right? You've got the national park, you've got the feds managing through the Army Corps, they're managing these dams. I mean, where is the access to this thing? And where are the tribes and all of that? There's 28 or 29 tribes that are river tribes. 28. Is that what you were looking for? Thank you for listening.
Jennifer. Anybody, any other comments, thoughts?
I guess I'll speak since Tui and yeah. I'll just be brief and just say that for Kuichasha, we did have a meeting down there with the council, I think several years ago, and went over it with Wes Martell and talked about water codes and thinking about how Winter's doctrine rights are anthropocentric and industry focused. So focusing solely on quantifying water rights for industry and agriculture specifically. And one thing that I learned from Wes is that for us to be Indigenous people, for us to be Oceti Sakowin, to live in the Missouri River Basin, we also need our wildlife, which needs water, our plant life and our medicine, which needs water. And currently under federal law, there's no guarantee for that kind of life. And so that's something that I think is important to emphasize, but also to look, and this is something, that I'll do and go back into each of these 28 tribes and look at their treaty rights and thinking about how those treaties, they articulate boundaries by water most often, especially eastern boundary, western boundary, and looking back at how those boundaries have been diminished or changed over time, but also thinking about how they are still in place, especially since, as Tahashi Kip pointed out that, the hunting and fishing rights still remain, especially if they're trying to create a national park. So that's all I really have to say about that. But I did do a brief study. I don't have any copies with me right now, but I did do a brief study of the treaty rights of Kuichasha going back to when we were at Whetstone Agency. And, there are clearly articulated treaty rights for the water, but also those treaties were made, with the Chanupa, which came from Te Sawi, who also, talked about the water, so that these aren't just agreements between human nations, but they're also, as we understood them, interpreted our treaties, because treaties are interpreted by both sides, not just by one. We can't see the monopoly of interpretation to the colonizer, but that those interpretations of our treaties also included what they call non-human life, which includes the water. And so I guess that's my commitment, is to go back and look at the 28 nations on this river and think about where there are overlaps and commonalities with the treaty rights.
That's really important. That's a kind of analysis that we need, in-depth analysis of where, because we might not have the same standing. We didn't sign the 1868 treaty. And then there was always a debate about 1851. And the 1858 treaty, sometimes when fresh eyes look at it, we had Pete Caposello look at our 1858 treaty. And in there, and I never even thought of that, he said there's a clause in there that says it goes 30 miles up the river. It doesn't say East Bank. It doesn't say West Bank. It doesn't say the middle of the river. So if, as the Indians understood it, it means 30 miles up the river, the whole river, both east and west. And he said, has anybody defined that? And I said, no, nobody, fresh eyes. He took a look at it. He said, let's explore that. But that's a kind of example, is examining those treaties and how it can put that puzzle together, because I think we severely need that. Rosebud has some more rights that we don't have. So rather than competing with each other and saying, I'm, Si Chungu or whatever, I'm Ihangtuan, we got to figure out where you can do this when I can't, and what I can do when you can't. That's a type of strategy, and it's going to take a while. But I don't know, Mari, does this type of discussion help us in drafting what we need to draft, or what are your thoughts?
Thank you. I would say it absolutely does. And specifically on the treaties, I would just say one example, and I know some of you are heading to White Earth. White Earth, the White Earth Council very recently, they have, as I mentioned earlier, they passed, we worked with them on our rights of Monoman, rights of wild rice law, which they recognize as the rights of the rice and the rights of the tribal members to harvest rice and save seed. And that was applied specifically to the reservation lands, White Earth. But the council very recently, earlier this year, expanded that and passed, expanded the law so that the rights of the rice now apply to the treaty lands as well for the White Earth. In the 1855 Treaty Authority, which different Chippewa bands are a part of, also passed a law regarding rights of the rice, and that applies to treaty lands. And so I think what we're going to start seeing are bands beginning to enforce those rights both on and off reservation onto treaty lands, which I think would be the first time that happens. So I think it's really critically important, this conversation, what you're just discussing, and the research that you're doing regarding the treaties, the 28 treaties.
It seems like we need to have a whole map where, when you talk about regulatory, and Kip had mentioned about the looting, how do we create a regulatory structure all up and down the river? Do we make law enforcement agreements which are good for us, not bad for us? That whole thing has to be fleshed out legally. But how do we 638, where we have these wonderful security that are here that has grown out of the Okorakichi, the society movement, how do we have that on the river, where they're patrolling the river constantly for those thousands of looters that are on the river right now? I was going on a walk over here several years ago on the South Shore, and this truck drove up, and they asked me, they said, "Can you tell me where White Swan is?" And I said, "Ooh, what are you looking for?" And they said, "Well, we just want to know where it is." And they had diving stuff in the back. So they were people who were scuba diving for the remains area. They were looters. And so who do I turn to? There's no agreements in place except for a screaming grandma. You know, how could I prevent them jumping in the pickup or whatever? But those are the type of regulatory. How do we look at 638? How do we look at grants? How do we instill that so we see our own rangers on the river? So that's on the map. We got to sit down and say, okay, somebody's got to pay attention to that one. How do we create that regulatory power without having to go to the Supreme Court? And then we're in this beautiful time of Deb Haaland. We hope, we keep praying for her, and Biden. But these are the times that we live in, which is really exciting that we can explore these things. But anything else? So many things on the river. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Brian Collins. I'm working as a policy analyst for the Rosebud Sioux tribe on matters involving the river above the dam. And I'm also a lawyer in Washington. And I've probably been practicing Indian law for 35 years, give or take, maybe a little more. And I'm very familiar with some of the issues that are being discussed here today. There are a number of laws that affect what you're trying to do, but there are a lot of unresolved issues, and those need to be identified. People need to come together. I've seen that happen in the Puget Sound area, where there are 25 tribes in Western Washington, and they have been very effective in protecting their fishing rights against the state of Washington. Every time they go to court, the tribes win. There are lots of issues involving the Missouri River right now. The state of South Dakota has taken the position that the tribes don't have fishing rights. Well, gee, Yankton Sioux tribe is right here on the boundary on the banks of the river. And the state takes the position there are no fishing rights. Somebody needs to think about challenging that and developing a strategy. And it's not just Yankton, it's Rosebud, it's all the other tribes up the river and down the river, and how you're going to forge ahead and protect the tribal interests and not forget about it, but actively go after it. Because it's going to take a lot of advocacy by the tribes to do what you're all talking about today. And it's not just lawyers, it's political, it's administrative, but it's going to take action and a commitment. And I hope that can happen. Anyway, I have committed the majority of my adult life to protecting tribal interests as a biologist, which I am, and a lawyer. And Faith and I are well acquainted. The fellow who was speaking, Kip, is my son, and the little guy running around with a ponytail of his Tokana. That's my grandson. So I'm as committed today as I have been all these years to working with the tribes and making it happen. Thank you.
Any other thoughts? Rosebud has an exciting thing going on where they own an island in the river at Whetstone, and they still mortgage it. So there's some pending things there that could really be utilized for the benefit of the other tribes, but those are things that we have to talk about together. But they mortgage that island, right? Twice. And so they potentially own the riverbed. And in the Biden administration with Fort Berthold, before in Obama, it was declared, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the Fort Berthold owned the riverbed. And then when Trump came in, the decision was reversed, and now it's gone back. And so the riverbed, what we're looking at here is that when there was the reservation and it was land, and then the water came over, that became riverbed. So potentially we own the riverbed. But those are the kind of maps that we're working on that we have to establish and figure out how does that affect the Oglala's? How does it affect the Ponca? This is Ponca territory also. But those are the kind of agreements that we have to have, because if we go somewhere and negotiate these and another tribe stands up and says, well, that's my territory, then there we go. We've gone in a different direction. But tuck those thoughts away so we can, when we get together, when our working session, we can start tackling those and probably develop teams from all of the Oceti. Yes. Somebody take this to him.
Lakota Committee Chairman. Bryson Lewis, Lakota Committee Chairman. Our Lakota Committee is kind of like the bridge between the IRE tribal government and the treaty issues. And we got 4 bands there: the Mni Sosa, the Oanupa, the Siasapa, and the Itasap Chola, and the keeper of the Hinchila Sancho Nupa, Orville Looking Horse, Tesawi, and her message is pretty clear when we listen to our creation story and listen to our stories that were handed down orally, that some of us got to hear when we were just young kids learning English. I'm 63 now, and Lakota was the first language I heard when I was in the household. Tuahe, my mother and father, and mostly everybody in the community of Dupree at that time spoke Lakota. And these stories were common. But nowadays, we have a whole generation of young people that are hungry for these stories that are actually messages that actually are predicting what's going to be happening today. So I remember in 2004, we completed a programmatic agreement with the Army Corps of Engineers. I forgot who the general was, but the colonel was okay guy, and sometimes you get federal agencies that have okay people in there, and sometimes you don't. But this enforcement issue came up. So the Wakbawashte, which is really our name, Wakbawashte, Good River, um, we were pushing for enforcement because we learned of all federal agencies, we learned from the CDC of a tanker carrying hazardous waste coming in on 212, and they lost it where it went. They lost the load or everything. It kind of sounded like they dumped that hazardous waste to us. It's like on the east side where it's not even monitored. You can drive a big rig in there at night, isolate it. You can pull a big rig with a lot of hazardous a tanker. You know how big a tanker is, and dump anything into that water. So that kind of come into our mind, when we heard that. What they were doing, they were tracking West Nile virus, and they found out that there was horseback riding on the rodeo livestock, rodeo to rodeo into Wyoming. That's how that West Nile was moving. That mosquito was moving. That's what they reported to us. And at that time, the river was really down. It was we was in a drought, but we got that sign. Not all the tribes signed that. There's 28 river tribes. Not all of them signed that programmatic agreement of 2004. We were trying to push the BIA to come in on enforcement. What helped us, our CPO and our DIPO, was that they had their prior police officers before they became DIPOs, and the Corps said that's good. That'll cover you guys because you guys got ex police officers for enforcement. So we were dealing with a lot of looting because the river was down. You could see the old community of LeBeau. It was that down, or you could see the road, where they flooded the LeBeau and another community. And there were human remains that were surfacing. And we were going to those islands with the Standing Rocks Tipo at the time, Tim Mintz. And the Corps, we were working on it, hoping for rain at the time, so the water could cover that up. At that time, our main water intake was in the Good River, and it was like about 16 feet. We were worried if it started that whirlpool action, we didn't know what it would be sucking up and sending up to our drinking water. So we finally had the Corps, they did some underwater stuff, and but now we have our main intake in the Mni Sosa, and that enforcement issue is still there, and we're supposed to spearhead that up with the programmatic agreement. And we need to, that's one of our issues with the Corps. We want all the tribes to push this enforcement. And the Bureau, they finally said, we're right, we're 100% behind you guys now, because they kept sending the wrong people, We wanted their law enforcement to be at these meetings. So that was a big issue back then in the early 2000s with the looting going on, with possible hazardous waste being dumped into the river. You never think about those things, until some good people tell you, give you heads up on what's going on. So I think this enforcement issue, we have some guys that are prior that scuba can dive. We're trying to build a search and rescue team, and even a recovery. So we got some guys that have that capability, that can scuba dive. But that's something that I didn't think about, like what you brought up about people going in and looting. That's another issue because some of those things that our tip on them were catching was you'd have a tent there, but they'd be digging underneath that tent, looking for things. So they shag out when they see our guys coming, so they leave those things behind. That's along the river, but inland along the rivers, there's a lot of dinosaurs too. And you got people that go in there. So we had to put up signage. That was our main point on that programmatic agreement was signage. No digging, no looting. And that was what the Corps was looking for because they were looking for whatever we could come up with to protect what's ours. So that's on the burner right now for everybody's information enforcement, and we want to push that hard, and we want the Bureau to kind of come in too, which they said they'd be behind us 100%, which is good. So that language, it's kind of probably be amendment to that programmatic agreement. And then the other thing that we want to amend in the programmatic agreement is emergency response. Because I think you remember that last time we met with the Corps up in Pier, they were hemming and hawing about how they were going to respond to DAPO. Finally, one of them said, we're just going to protect the dams. And that's all. They're not going to respond to, like Standing Rock would have to respond, and we'd have to try to get a team to go up and respond. And I heard hemp was a good absorbent. So that's something to think about too as tribes, that all those possibilities with hemp, fiber, and building, and all that, even an absorbent. So I think a lot of things that we should pull together as tribes is the things we grow and how we address water quality. Because you're talking about a living being. And I'll tell you a story I heard a long time ago. This guy told me a story. There was two brothers coming back from the east, and one of them found a big old egg. So his brother said, "Hey, just leave it alone." But his brother kept it, and they're coming back. They had to cross the Missouri. So when they got to the Missouri, that brother, all that time, is eating that egg, and he was done with it. So when they got to the banks, his brother told him, he transformed, he changed, and he went into the river. So he said, when you come through, anytime you come through, bring these things with me. You corn wash now, he told certain things, offer this to me when you go across. I'll make sure you have a safe crossing. That's a whole story. So the water quality, what we heard from the inside, the water quality guy with the Corps, very concerning, man, because he said everything, there was a flood that hit up by Lemon, and two elder women, non-Indians, got washed away. They found one, the other one they never found. And the other thing is all these things to the flood that goes into the Missouri. The water quality guy said that at the bottom of the middle of the river, whatever, how many 100 feet or however deep it is, he said all these things are collecting in there, and it's creating a dead zone, and it could affect the water quality, and that's kind of something that should be very concerning for everybody. not only the oil slick or oil, but what's happening at the bottom of the river of life. So we have a natural living being. I support what the indigenous people on the globe are doing about water as a being, as like a human spiritual being, and its spirit is in us, and we're made up of it, of that spirit of life. So if we come up with that language, I didn't get to do any research on the tribes the ones that adopted that language as their law, but I hope we get that done now, and all of us adopt it. Just like Standing Rock's coming up with the amendment to NAGPRA. I think we need to all look at that and adopt that as tribal governments and support it as treaty councils. That we amend that NAGPRA, and then we make this law that Mni Sosa Mni Wichoni, the water of life is. It's just like a comparison you do with something that's very destructive. Citizens United. Now that's a corporate entity, but it's more or less a human being. According, if the Supreme Court don't overturn that, which I think there's a movement to overturn Citizens United, because you got to look at the root of these destructive behavior. Why? You got billionaires going up here, 65 miles up, and anybody got some millions of dollars to take a joyride? It's kind of insane, man, but there's some artificial intelligence that's behind that that's very scary. And that's like beings with no souls. That was predicted to happen. And it's happening. So if we don't challenge these things that are going on, billionaires and their playgrounds, and Supreme Court with their corporate entity that's treated like a human being, then I see all the rights of all the people that this water is a living being, spiritual being, that if you keep destroying her, we could be able to file a lawsuit to protect her under, attempts of killing this water, which is insane what's going on. And there's other things going on globally that are on that level of insanity also. If we can't ask for full disclosure as a people, even on this SARS-2 COVID, the full disclosure on it, then we're being lied to, because there's a censorship and a medical nihilism going on in this country, our country, which is not right. And we deserve full truth and disclosure on anything, everything. Even these guys going up 65 miles up, and what kind of this percolate that's in these challengers, those two beams, those two that blew up, that one that blew up, that Percocet, that started in the early 2000s to start affecting the groundwater in 23 states. And then they blacked that out. 20 years now, they blacked that out. So you don't see those shuttles going up because of this pollution, this chemical that's going into the groundwater. So it is a destructive way of life that is a playground for these billionaires and these guys that are behind these technologies like DARPA. And I think they should be called to question now because of this artificial intelligence that's, again, we need full disclosure. So if we're going to protect the water, which I believe we have to, then I think the language is there for that. But there's more intense things going on that's going to pretty much change the face of this planet pretty soon or later, but it's coming. So I agree with let's protect the water, and that I think that meeting will be forthcoming for the enforcement with the programmatic agreement, and I think that'd be good to call the court to task on that. Kalamalo. I think they're trying to set it up. I think she's trying to set it up for September. I'm not sure. Steve was talking with her, so we'll find out. Okay.
He daku, dakuku woyagdaka ki he washte. Ohina mani agdagda e hanakchi umpi ki he oyakapi ota uyuhapi ashwana unkiktujapi. I wanted to thank Bryce for bringing up an important part of our data building is we have to gather those stories like that one that he just told. When we say oyakapi, that's actual oral history of it. Oyakapi means dokitkeapi. Bryce, they told it that way. It's translated. And then the ones ohunkake means the ones that the animals told us when the Hanakshi, the Wamakashkan could talk. But those stories are all along the river, and we need to gather those because I'm mindful of one. Tui Mary Louise, she's 90 years old, and she comes down for our Ishnati. And she said every time you bring the altars and the Daku Shkanshkan together, it creates portals and openings for the past to come in, the future. And so she said, always be cognizant of that. And we do have an altar here and different, there's an eagle, Wambadi, when she, Ahomini, Kia. There's several above us as we're here this morning. But one that happened when we were having Ishnati, we had a relative come from Sioux Valley. Her name was Victoria. But she was sitting by the shore and she had her feet in the water. And all of a sudden she screamed and she got up and she was pushing herself back, and she was elderly, so she couldn't move real fast. But she got up and she said, Taku, ooh. She said, something's coming. And so we all ran over to the shore. And she said what happened is, and this goes back to a story that we were told that the Shunka Wakanki, Mni Etaha, that's where they came from, that we were gifted the horse. And she told that story about that whirlwind that came in the water, and out of there became the horse before the Spanish. So she had told us about that. And so when she told us, she said maybe that door opened because Victoria was sitting there, and she said, there was something that was clopping in the water like a horse running by, and it went by her and she could see the tracks of the water coming out of the water. So the door opened, it was recreated, and it was verified. So those type of things like Bryce was talking about is we need to collect those stories because that's living. That life was given to us from the river. So if you can kiksuya some of those, Bryce, and the ones that speak Lakota, and even the ones that don't, if you hear those from your families, we need to collect those. So we'll talk about, be sure and sign your names. We'll send out a notice, and then we'll try to figure out who those story keepers are. The other thing that Bryce mentioned that I want you to pay attention to, I'm not sure if Kip is still here, or you're a Tipo too, but there is a National NAGPRA Review Committee that is at work right now, and they're going to have a national meeting in October. Standing Rock is on top of it through Tim Metz, and you've seen that resolution that he came up with. But they've been talking about revising NAGPRA for years, but we never have done it. We just talk about it. But now the review committee is doing it. So they called me last night, and I was talking to Honor Keeler, and I said, who's they? And she's on the advisory committee, but every tribe needs to contact them and figure out how it becomes we, not they. And so Standing Rock drafted up a really amazing resolution. So each of us need to go back to our tribes and make sure we're part of that we know we're inside of that, because it's going to be reviewed like Bryce said. And I think October 12th is the national meeting. So look on the NAGPRA site and you'll be able to find that. So, Jim, I'm going to ask Jim and Joseph to make some comments, and then I think we're moving towards lunch. My stomach said. You thought it was thunder. Thought it was the Wakians. You want to do biology talk and buffalo talk?
I can do a million talks, but who wants to be the guy that gets in the way of lunch? On that hand too. I'm Jim Stone. I'm from here. My family lives right across the river up here. Our allotment on this side of the dam. Originally one of the White Swan families that they talk about up there. I worked. Actually, so that Faith said, I'd like to thank Faith and everybody that's here. You know, this is very important work in that it builds a foundation that you can then take action. I worked for the tribe here for 13 years, variety of natural resource programs, different things. Was lucky to participate in a lot of things. I spent 10 years at Intertribal Buffalo Council, where I was blessed to be able to spend 10 years just dealing with buffalo. Now I've been the general manager of our casino for 4 years, which, yeah, some kind of career path change there, but it all fits the master plan, if I could say there's a master plan. But really, you know, the whole intent and the purpose is to build, you know, a strong sovereign community. And the natural resources, you know, I was always attracted to the field of biology and everything because it addressed a lot of the stories I grew up hearing. It addressed a lot of the things I grew up doing, you know, basically living on this river. There was a lot of things that happened when I was younger that in hindsight were a blessing. You know, my father and my uncle at one point exercised our treaty hunting rights right here below this dam by putting gill nets out and catching fish until the state caught them. You know, and that kind of didn't go their way 100%, but they really didn't. They came out of it pretty clean. You know, it probably would have been a better case if the tribe would have joined them on their behalf to fight the battle. You know, basically the state recognized that as tribal members, we have a right to hunt, gather on this river. Their only point of contention was the fact that absent us owning the land adjacent to the river, we don't have the right to access through their land, taking a gill net, which is what their argument. It's not a very good argument, you know, since then. But that's kind of the argument that, you know, my uncle, he was a veterinarian. He went to Iowa State University and got his degree there. Somehow he ended up running our casino. So I don't know what's going on with this casino being the end all, but one of the things that I guess early on, you know, being indoctrinated into the federal government side of things, going to EPA, learning these trainings, I was blessed at one of them to misread a flyer and end up going to an Indigenous Environmental Network conference where I ended up in Ashland, North Carolina, way up in the mountains. When I thought I was going to a hotel, they dropped me off at a Jellystone National Park. And so I was in a tent for a week, which was pretty cool, but it also kind of, it opened my mind as to a different view, and, you know, and that felt a lot more comfortable. So in this talk about water, you know, we go back to water being the foundation of life, water being here before we were here, you know, and part of that when I was young, it was, you know, talking to people about water, and they would say, talking about our ancestors, the previous generations that lived more off the land, they knew where the good water was. They knew where these plants that associated themselves with water were at. They knew where this medicine was at, you know, and part of me when I was growing up always said, why is it they, you know, why isn't it we? Why don't we know? You know, and that's carried with me, that as we've had these discussions, and sometimes I take steps this way, then I take a couple steps back, because you get in that rabbit's hole of saying, let's rewrite the master manual. You know, if you've ever seen the Corps of Engineers master manual, it stands this tall. I think there's 12 or 14 editions of them, and I read every one of them for out of boredom, out of whatever, just out of wanting to have an understanding, because part of my mind is I need to know the little tiny pieces that build up to something before I feel like I can do something with it. And so in reading that, part of me said, you know what, there's none of us in this, but if we want to change the river, they're saying you got to participate in this process. And then the other part of me says, well, how do we reverse the process to recognize that we need our knowledge there? So as you're talking about the plants and everything that relies on water, and developing a water code, and developing this recognition of your water system, and you're quantifying water rights, and you're doing all these things, without that foundation that's based in you, you're really unprepared to fight the battle with them. And that's what I've seen. Been doing some of this stuff for quite a while on a lot of different levels, and so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on everything. I'll do like the greatest hits of what's been discussed. And one of the things that I appreciate here, is this action, this bringing of this totem through here, and drawing awareness, because you have activism. Out of activism has to come action, and so what is the action? This is the action. Whatever we do here, whatever every tribe whatever we do locally, that's the action. So how are you going to act on the activism? Because it takes a real concentrated effort. So when Faith was mentioning the art of war, I grew up listening to my dad and a lot of great men that talked about these same type of concepts, and her father was one of them. And the majority of them were Vietnam vets. They came back from doing some very, there's movies about some of the things my uncle's seen, and those parts of what they talked about, you don't want to hear, but that's reality. That's life. That's what they do as a warrior. But the other part they took away was the people they were fighting. They were us. They're simple, primitive people fighting off a superpower. And so when they came home, they said, we're simple, primitive people. Why can't we fight off a superpower? And so my dad would say, read this book from this man in China. Why? Because they fought off these same superpowers, and they have everything they started with. And so you learn the practices. And one of them is something that got mentioned earlier. These forums we go into, these consultations, the things we participate in, how are they founded in the relationship we established in the treaties? Do they even fit in the treaties? So how do we rearrange that battlefield? The one thing they said, that Faye said, is something I've been preaching a long time. When you get the mic, forget about making an impression, make a point. Because if you make an impression, they go away and they're like, oh, they didn't tell us what to do. So, we're going to go back to do what we was going to do anyway. That they rely on us for that. But there's also a purpose. There's a purpose that when you sit in that meeting and you get all of these federal employees, bureaucrats for life, elected officials, everyone that sits up here, all these decision makers, when the first person representing the tribe that gets up, has the braids, has the look, gets up and speaks in his language, that changes the playing field. When you send someone like me up there, looking like me, talking like me, they think I'm one of them. So they say, okay, we're here. When you get someone that shows that why we're different, and that we're always going to be different, that we're not trying to be you. We have our own cultures. We have our own language. We have our own strength. You see them waver up there. And so when properly presented, the shock and the awe, you make them uncomfortable up there. And when you get them unbalanced, then bring in your stormtroopers of science and knowledge that have read every one of those pieces of paper that they wrote and know where all the gaps are hidden. Everywhere, your lawyers, everyone that knows how to take advantage of the system they put in place. Once you get them on their heels, then you run them over with knowledge of their system. And once you establish the fact that fundamentally we have a stronger right to be here than you, we're also smarter than you. And that's kind of the way I've been raised. So I apologize if it comes off in some sort of way, but in looking at it, that's an approach, because it all carries its purpose. We did a lot of work